So our female lead is basically her grandmother. No. Our female lead, her aunt who she lives with, is part of the, well, she's also kind of part of the Wisteria Society of, oh, this name is ridiculous. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my January wrap up. Apologies if I sound weird, I can't actually tell right now, or if I am a little less energetic, let's say, in this video. I'm a little under the weather, but we're going to do this. We are trudging through here to talk about the books that we read in January. Me. January was an interesting month because I didn't go in with, like, let's say lower expectations. I think I went in with like no expectations because January is one of those weird months that either can be really great or really terrible. There's like almost no in between for me. And while the ratings disagree, I had a pretty decent month. And I also like had all these plans that I wanted to do. I had a really ambitious TBR. I wasn't even sure I was going to get through everything that I wanted to do. I was implementing some new rules in the TBR game where like I wasn't really doing punishments, but I was still trying to get through everything. Like there's just a lot of things that I had on my plate, but I was still able to read 14 books. How? That's a great question. I'm not even sure because like I said, I had plans. I had a vlog idea that I was doing throughout the course of the entire month, which was books that I had tried to get to last year and just didn't make time for. So I'll leave that vlog linked above because those books are kind of like scattered throughout the month. It's not just like they're all at like one time. So I'll leave that linked above if you'd like to check it out. But I had that plan and I was still able to like fit in random books that I found and decided to pick up this month. Like it was so random and yet it was great and I enjoyed my entire time. So we have a lot to talk about again with 14 books. So let's jump right into the stats. So like I mentioned, I read 14 books and that was over 4,323 pages and about 112 hours listened, which is over the course of 3 audiobooks, 3 physical books, 1 ebook, and 7 mixed books. So we kind of like spread it out a little bit this month, which is different than usual. The age category also was pretty, well, relatively spread out. We had 1 middle grade, 2 YA, 2 new adult, and 9 adult books. Genre's pretty normal-ish for me. We had 3 fantasy, 8 romance, 2 mystery, and 1 sci-fi. Here's where it gets interesting, the ratings. We had 3 5 stars, 3 4 stars, and 8 3 stars. So I found myself, let's take a little side note here. I found myself being a harsher rater this month. I feel like I look back on my past couple of years and I'm a fan of the 4 star. The 4 star is great. That's what I usually gravitate towards, especially if I'm not sure how I feel about it. Like I enjoyed parts of it, but I don't know, like it wasn't amazing, which really should be my 3 star rating. So I think I rated harsher this month, but I'm kind of starting to readjust maybe what I think a 4 star is because again, I rate everything 4 star at this point. So that's probably why my ratings are a little all over the place. So starting off the month was one that was very random to really start the year off with, and that's because I had the audiobook from my library and was about to go back, and that is the Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels by Adina Holton. This is the first in the Dangerous Damsels series. There's currently, I think, there's at least 1 more, possibly 2 out, and like a new one's coming out sometime this year, but I might have rearranged those numbers a little bit. This is one that I got the ARC on NetGalley. I'm trying to clear out my NetGalley shelf. I'm actually trying to make a actual effort this year to get it to 0. I'm telling myself that I cannot ask for any other books until it's cleared out. And I think I've done a decent job so far of it. But this was one of those, and the audiobook was at my library, and I kept pushing it back and pushing it back. And I thought I was going to make time for it at the end of last year, and it just didn't work. So I made time for it at the beginning of this year. And it also was included in that vlog that I mentioned, just like randomly. This is just pure fun. Like, there's not really anything fantastic about the story. The characters are fine. If you're going in thinking this is going to be a decent historical romance, it is, but it's not going to be historically accurate in any sense of the word. So this is for like literally palate cleanser, good time. You don't expect a lot from it kind of story. And this one basically follows our two main characters who, in pure Kelsey fashion, I have forgotten their names. Our main female lead, her aunt, well, her as well, they're both part of the Wisteria Society, and they are just a group of women who hang out. Honestly, it's very like uppity almost, and she is not. Her aunt's one of the senior members, but she is not, and she really, really wants to be one of the senior members. But her father has had some bad has a bad reputation, and so for hurting the society, and they think that she's going to do that, and so they don't really give her the time of day. And then you've got our main male lead who has been hired to assassinate her, but he's also like got 5 different personalities. Literally, he's a different name to a different person. So he's a little all over the place, but basically they meet a few times, and she like thwarts his plot a few times to like quote unquote assassinate her, and then they end up having to team up because the entire Wisteria Society, including her aunt, goes missing, and she has to go rescue them, and this guy helps her out. And it's them being ridiculous. Again, there's not a whole lot of substance to this book. It was just kind of fun to start the year off with. I didn't expect a whole lot going in. I really wasn't sure what to expect going in, but the amount of substance I thought this book was going to have, it had even less. But it didn't dampen my enjoyment. I still gave it 4 stars. I still enjoyed the ridiculousness of the story and just some of the clashing things within this book, because like they are obviously different than normal society because they're quote unquote scoundrels. They do things differently. They kill their husbands because they don't want to be married, or they fight. They have assassins come and try to get people. Like, it's all of that kind of stuff. But then there's still the whole like, don't show your ankles because propriety and stuff like that. And so the conversations are really interesting because like you'll have these two characters who are literally fighting each other, and at the same time they will be having like a verbal argument about a specific subject topic that's not appropriate to talk about in the presence of ladies. And it's the most ridiculousness I've ever read. I don't think I'm going to continue with the series just because the other things that are in this I feel like are going to be relatively the same vein as this. I haven't said no officially to not continuing, but I'm not particularly like looking to continue with the series just because I think it's going to be the same thing over and over again, but not in like an enjoyable way. It's just going to be very, very repetitive, which sometimes works, but I think for the purpose of what this was, it was just goofy, and I don't know a better way to describe it. So I enjoyed it. It was a good kind of palate cleanser to really start the year, start off like between my Christmas reads and starting off the year with a clean slate, and I got an arc off my plate, which is exciting. So that was, I still had a good time with it. Next one I read was it was also for that video, and it completely took me by surprise. And that is Our Violent Ends, and this is by Chloe Gong. I went out and bought myself my own copy, which I have since, as you can see, tabbed it, because I had it from the library, because I kind of just felt, the first one was just kind of okay. I gave the first book of the series 3 or 3.5 stars, and this one I gave 5. I loved my time reading this, and I don't know if it's because this continues on from the first book, so the characters are people we know. There's a lot of angst in this one, specifically between our two main characters. The forbidden love trope and that kind of like vibe is really present. It was present in the first one, but it was more present in this one because of some of the events that took place at the end of the first book. And there's this whole insect plot line that was really important for the first book that is in here, but on like a minute scale. Like, it's barely mentioned. It's something totally different. That's really what's taking root here. I mean, they are part of the story, but very, very differently. So I don't know if all of those things coming together, if I paid attention to this one more than the first one, I don't know what it was, but I was blown away. I was obsessed with these characters. I could not stop reading it. All I wanted to do was get home and immediately pick it up again. And now I want to reread the first one, which I felt like was just okay, to see if there's things that I missed that maybe a reread would bump up my enjoyment of it. I don't really know how to explain why I loved this so much, but I'm sure many of you know this series, but this is a duology that takes place in Shanghai in the 20s, and it follows our two main characters, Juliet and Roma, and it's a reimagining of sorts of the Romeo and Juliet story. It has these two rival gangs at this time, and it's their kids. Roma Montague and Juliet are the two kids of the people who were like running the gangs, and they've had things in the past. They have like had a fling, and the first book starts because a lot of their gang members are dying, and they think that maybe, oh, it's the other gang who's doing it, because that's very, very normal at this time to have those rival gangs. But it turns out that they're both dying of the same thing, and so Roma and Juliet, along with some other people within their like community and in their lives, are teaming up to kind of figure out what the heck is going on. And there's a huge cliffhanger and plot twist at the end of the first book, which is why I wanted to continue, because based on just the book alone, there wasn't really anything that was pushing me to keep going, but the plot twist at the end was phenomenal, and I had to keep going. And there was a lot of like things that you as the reader know. I can't remember what this plot device is called, but there's that thing where like you know things that a lot of the characters within this book don't know, and so you as the reader are sitting there like going, oh my gosh, you know, don't do X, Y, and Z, or like, oh, if only you knew about this thing. And so like it was really fun to be in that mindset within this book. I don't know, I loved it, and I don't really have an explanation as to why it worked. It is very gruesome, I will say. This is one of the books that I would consider new adult. I can't remember if Goodreads, I think Goodreads categorizes it as YA, and I think a lot of places categorize it as YA. I would categorize it as new adult. I know that that's based on like how old the characters are, but based on a lot of the gore and maybe not gore, but a lot of the violence and like their rival gangs. There's going to be violence, there's a lot of death, that kind of thing that's happening within this book. I would categorize it as new adult, but I loved it. Clearly, I went out and bought my own copy, so that was my first 5-star of the month, and it did not disappoint. The next one is one of my other 5 stars for the month. It was also an arc that I have now read and also was part of the vlog, so it's got a lot of things going for it, and that is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and this is by Sangu Mandana, I believe is how you pronounce it. This was so fun. I remember I had started this book a little bit last year sometime. I think it came out in like August maybe, and I had started it. I made it like 5 chapters in, I think, and I just ran out of time. I don't know what happened, but I got distracted with other things. So I did start over when I read it this time. Not that I had forgotten anything, because I hadn't. I remembered everything that had happened really, but it was just to get like the full effect of reading this book. And I hardcore fell in love. So this one is just a fun book if you are interested in fantasy, interested in witchy books. This falls into that cozy fantasy vibe that is like really popular right about now, where it's a lower stakes fantasy story. It is also a book that I think would be really good for people who are just starting out fantasy, or just trying to figure out if fantasy is their thing, because it's very lower fantasy in the sense of it takes place in our world, so it's more of like a realistic fantasy than, let's say, like a big epic fantasy kind of story. So I adored this one. So this one follows our main character, Mika Moon, and she's a witch. And in this, kind of like in this world, witches they kind of hide their identity and don't let really anybody know about it, because some stuff that's happened in their past, which you kind of learn throughout the book. But it really, like, everyone's a little bit lives on their own kind of thing. And no one, like, they meet up like once a month, I think it is, just to make sure that everything's okay, but they really don't interact much. And when, like, witches lose their mothers really quickly after their birth, so all witches are raised orphans usually, and they just kind of have to learn witchcraft as they grow up. And so Mika's little, like, act of rebellion is she has the equivalent of a YouTube channel where she does witchy things, and she, like, does real magic, but she plays it off as, like, pretending to do magic kind of thing. And she's discovered by this house, by a couple of people who live in this house. And in this house, there are 3 young witches who have been adopted, all really, really young, and their magic is starting to kind of like cause problems. And so some of the people, like the caretakers of this house, reach out to Mika to have her come and tutor these kids. And so she does that, and while she's there, she kind of like discovers like a family that's there, and there is a grumpy librarian there named Jamie that they have kind of like a little flirtatiousness there going on. So it's really Mika finding herself and finding her family. So I just fell head over heels. It's a really good book. It's really wholesome, and there's a lot within this about like finding your people. It takes the found family trope and it like bumps it up tenfold, and I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was super sweet, super cute. There is a beautiful romance throughout it as well, so if you want those romantic elements, that's there. It's not the main purpose of the story, but it is a good chunk of the story, and just kind of Mika finding herself, finding what she wants out of life, tired of living on her own, that kind of thing. And it's just beautiful. It's so sweet. So I'll leave my review down below, as well as the other book I mentioned earlier, so that you guys can see my like full thoughts on it. But I just thought it was so fun. Another book that I just flew through because I couldn't stop reading it, and I didn't want to put it down. And I am not so patiently waiting for my Fancy Fairly copy, which should be coming in the mail soonish. So yeah, this was an anticipated release for me. I had really hyped it up. I'm not sure if it was particularly hyped. I feel like it is relatively hyped, especially with, again, that cozy fantasy vibe really being popular right now because of Legends and Lattes. I think this one got pretty popular, but it was definitely hyped in my mind as far as like what I actually thought was going to, what it was going to be about and how I was going to enjoy it. And I ended up absolutely loving it. The next one that I picked up is a buddy read that I did with my friend Taylor, and that is The Chief by Monica McCarty, and this is the first in the Highland Guard series. This is one that we're going to be reading throughout the course of the year, so we're hopefully going to be picking up a different volume or a different book in the series every single month. And this was just the first one, and I ended up giving this one 3 stars. This one, let's just start off with the trigger warning, because there's quite a few. There is sexual assault / rape, domestic abuse, and just general gross gore and violence within this book. This book is set in the time of Scotland, and it follows this guy named Bruce. He is Robert the Bruce. He handpicks 10 warriors to help him on his quest to free Scotland. And the guy in this book, Tor, he has been tasked as being kind of like the one that trains them all. And he really doesn't want to get married. He's been married before. It was fine. And he doesn't really want that, but he somehow gets hoodwinked, let's say, into marrying our main female lead, Christina Fraser. And so he is, you know, all of these lords and Scottish men are coming to his keep basically to learn how to fight and kind of fight like a good team and be this like secret force for Robert. And each book in the series, it says 10 here, but I'm thinking that a few are going to get added because each book in the series follows somebody else in this group, and they all have like a code name. So obviously he is the chief because he's the one who's leading them. So this one was like, it was good. It had its, you know, historical romance Scottish vibes. There was things about it that I really enjoyed, but it kind of let me down in the sense of this, when I say this is historically accurate, I mean, there's some things that have been switched around, obviously, but like this is more historically accurate than your normal historical romance, because a lot of the time you will see people who have modernized their beliefs or have just like some societal norms that were part of that time period, but might have been adjusted a little bit to be more advantageous to the plot. Whereas this one, it is not going to steer away from the situations. Like, we were in chapter 3 and we were immediately having a sexual assault scene, and I was like, excuse me. It just kind of came out of nowhere. And the interesting is not the right word, but like the part that I like noticed about this is that at this time, that's what would have happened. They would not have cared about women's rights. They wouldn't have given women a second thought. And they don't do that as much. I mean, they do to an extent, but there are definitely aspects of this book that have other authors have like kind of, you know, made fuzzy, made a little more modernized so that the reader can kind of accept some of the stuff that's going on, and she has not done that. She's like, here's what it's going to be like, and this is not going to be pretty. And so the romance part of it was fine. There wasn't anything spectacular. I did like seeing our characters kind of like grow towards one another a little bit, but it started off real rough, almost literally. And I don't know. I think it was getting used to her writing. Like, I've read something by Monica McCarty before, but I also didn't particularly love that one. But that was for totally different reasons. It's been a while since I read that. Whereas this one, I think I'm still really interested in the series, and I think it was really sweet to see their romance blossom over the course of this book. And I'm interested to see where the rest of the series is going to go, because again, we follow somebody different in every single book. And I think that's going to be fascinating to learn about. But this really just kind of like had to set the scene for where we're going to go with the series, and why all these men are in the same place, and, you know, why they're part of this force. And like, it does not shy away from the violence aspect of the fact that these guys are literal warriors, secret warriors, but warriors. And there's a lot there. So it's rough. It's quite a rough story, because it doesn't shy away from any of the details. So I feel like if you like things like Outlander, because Outlander's like that, it doesn't shy away from some of the more gory aspects and violent aspects of this time period, then this one might be for you. It's more romantic, I think, than maybe Outlander. It's in the sense of like, this is it. Their story is now done. They might show up in future volumes, I keep calling them volumes, in future books in the series, but like, we're moving on to somebody else now. So I am still really interested. I still like the story overall. That's why I got 3 stars. There were still aspects of it that I did enjoy, but there was a time period of like getting used to her writing and how she's going to continue with the series. So I think moving forward, I'll probably enjoy them more, because I'll know what to expect with her stuff. But yeah, it was just kind of generally just okay. There were definitely aspects that I was like, not in love with these parts. The next book that I picked up was Midwinter Murders by Agatha Christie. This is a collection of winter or Christmas, specifically winter, short stories, mystery events, if you will, by Agatha Christie. And this is like most short story collections. This is hard to review because each one is so different. I will say, if you are trying to figure out if Agatha Christie is for you, this is probably a good book to read, because there are a lot of everything in this book. You get some Perrault short stories, you get some Miss Marple series, like that series a little bit. You also get her Tommy and Tuppence. There is at least 1, maybe 2 stories in here that follow them, and they're not someone I've read about yet. So I do have 1 book by them, and that might be the next Agatha Christie book I get to, because they actually are very, very interesting to read about. And then you do also have some that don't follow like a specific investigator. But if you're trying to figure out if her style is for you, this is a collection of a bunch of different types of stories. So I think it's good to kind of step into to figure out. My favorite one was the first one. The first one is called 3 Blind Mice, and it doesn't follow a specific investigator at all. It's definitely the longest one in this. I think it's a good 30-40 pages maybe, and I'm trying to figure out, oh no, it's like 70 pages. I lied. I was all kinds of wrong. I liked that one the best. I felt like that had the biggest twist. It reminded me a little bit of the And Then There Were None book, which is still my favorite book by Agatha Christie to date, and I enjoyed it. It definitely gave me that winter vibe. There's definitely some that are set around Christmas, but it really did give you that like winter vibe. I was gonna give you some 3.5 stars. I think I'm discovering that short story collections are not for me. I like the idea of them. I always go in with very high expectations, and not high expectations, but with high hopes. And I always end up just giving them like 3 stars, because again, hard to rate an entire book based on a bunch of different things, and each story is so different. So I think this is a great gateway into her stuff to see if she is going to be for you, because there's some super short things that do wrap up quickly, obviously, but then like I said, 3 Blind Mice by her is a really good longer one to dive into, and it's got all the aspects that you want. And like, again, that one kept me up. Like, I was going to bed and I was like, I'll just read a little bit of this before I go to bed, and I ended up reading like the whole thing because I was so invested in that one. And the rest of them I could like give or take. Some worked, some didn't, which I think is pretty normal for short stories. So yeah, I gave it 3.5 stars. But it did make me want to read the Tommy and Tuppence book that I've got, which now I'm thinking that might be a series for me because they are an investigative duo. It's a married couple that fascinates me. I'm very interested in them. So yeah. The next one that I picked up was the Kraken's Sacrifice by Katie Robert. This is the second in her A Deal with a Demon series. There are quite a few trigger warnings, so I'll go find those because she's really good at creating, like, putting content warnings at the very beginning of her book, as well as on her website. If you ever are interested in anything Katie Robert, check out her website because she goes into grave detail about all of those. So there's a lot in here, so I would check it out. But the biggest ones that I saw were abuse and neglect. They do talk about pregnancy termination within this book. There is spousal death. There's some grief. There's some body shaming, a few things like that. But the biggest ones are those abuse and neglect within a relationship, a familial relationship. So this one follows Catalina, and this series takes place basically in this other world, and women basically, something is not great in their world, whether it's like the first one where she has an abusive husband, this one where she has a very neglectful family and she's just trying to like survive on her own. I'm not sure what the ones in the future have, but they all are trying to do something. And so they make a deal with this demon, and the demon is trying to kind of create these peace times in his world between all of these different, you know, groups of people and all these different lands. And his way of doing that is creating these deals that the leaders of all those different lands create with him. So they sign a deal with the demon, give him 7 years. They kind of go on this auction, if you will, and they're auctioned off to these different creatures, and these creatures have to take care of them. And there's a very specific, explicit contract that they have to do. So if the human is hurt in any way, shape, or form, the contract is null and void, and the creature has to give up their land to the demon. So they are very well taken care of. And each of these books in the series follows a different relationship, if you will. So this one follows Catalina, and she gets auctioned or goes with the guy that is the Kraken. And it's very interesting to see their relationship. I gave it 3.5 stars. No, I just gave it 3 stars. Because what I'm noticing about these books is while they are short, and I do like shorter books, there's not enough for me. Are the sex scenes great? Absolutely. If you like those monster romance kind of vibes, you're gonna love her stuff. Those scenes are not a problem. Those are probably the best parts of the book. But as I've said many times before, I need plot with my smut. I need something else with my smut. And this just doesn't have enough, in my opinion. There is plot, obviously. They do a pretty good job of plot, but I feel like they need to be longer for me to really buy into this relationship. They're good. They scratch the itch that I have when I want to read her books, but they don't really do anything beyond that. There's not, she has a lot of like this great character and development ideas, and there's great starts to these characters, starting to come together, fall in love, that kind of stuff. But it's always way faster than I think is realistic, and just, I feel like there's just ways to build it differently that would be more enjoyable as a whole. But they're fun. I'm still very interested. It's a really weird series because even though I've given both of the books that I've read in the series 3 stars, I am so interested in the rest of the series. Like, she's continually coming out with books. I have 1 more in this series. There's another one coming out this year, and she's just announced that she's doing 2 more in this series. And I'm gonna read all of them because I'm still interested in this world. I still find this world fascinating because we follow different people each time. And in the first book, it is mentioned all 4 of the women that were on this auction together. And so that's what the first 4 books are going to follow, I think. Although the one that I've got is called The Demon's Bargain. And actually, I think that one doesn't actually follow one of the girls. But because of that mention, now I'm interested in all of these characters. So I'm still heavily invested and heavily interested in this book, even though every time I've read it, it's only been a 3 star. It's really bizarre. So it was just kind of generally okay, not great, not amazing, but it was a short read, and I still like Katie Roberts' writing, but I still hold fast that Dark Olympus is her best series that I've read, in my opinion. I'm ever so slowly closing my blinds because the sun, like, can you see that? Ugh, it's just being ridiculous. Okay, the next book that I read is also another buddy read that I did with my friend Taylor. Her name is, if you don't know it already, her name's gonna be really popular this year. So this one was 10 Rules for Marrying a Duke by Melissa McLean. This is a standalone book by this author set in Regency, England kind of time period. And we read her Western book, her Gunslinger series, Hitched to a Gunslinger. One of my favorite books from last year. Swear by it. Love that series so, so much. So we wanted to give her obviously another shot, and I'm still wanting to read more things by her. She has a Scottish series that I'm very interested in, but this one ended up only getting 3.5 stars, and I think this one suffers from the beginning being amazing. So this book follows our main character Arabella, and her sister kind of got married to someone who at this time was considered not to be of the same social standing, and so it's kind of hurt her family. And her younger sister has dreams of getting married. And so she decides that she needs to team up with someone who's going to give her family a good name. So she runs into this guy. He's the Duke of Wisteria. And she comes up to him and kind of gives him this marriage of convenience, let's say. She decides she wants to marry him, offers to marry him and give him an heir in exchange for him helping her family's social standing getting better, as well as finding a good suitor for her sister. And kind of similar to, I think, another book that I've read. It reminded me of The Duchess Deal a lot by Tessa Dare, because they decided, like, once they come to terms, whether it's like the sister gets married, they have like a year to get the sister married as well as create an heir. And when that's the case, she can go live in his estate in the country, and he can keep doing debauchery, and because he's considered a rake, so he can keep doing what he's been doing, and that way he's not tied down, which was his issue with wanting to get married, but he knows he needs an heir. So it's that kind of thing. And so the very beginning of the book is them making this deal and creating these 10 rules for their marriage, and it is hilarious. Michelle McLean is such a good banter writer, which is one that I definitely noticed in the Western series that I read. Like, the banter in that book is immaculate, and it really shows in this beginning, like I'd say 10 chapters or so, maybe a little bit less, when they're really setting in to getting married and like creating these rules, and they're just so sassy to each other, and like the best way, and you can tell they're like joking around, and they can tell the other one's joking around with them, so it's just really fun to like have that going. But then the whole middle section, honestly can't tell you a single thing that happened, and I only read it a couple of weeks ago. So like that middle section is very, very forgettable. And then the end did have like a cute, like a cute little like climactic moment that I'm always a sucker for. So that still was okay. But the middle section just kind of fell flat. I don't even know what really happened. They didn't really talk about their problems. I wouldn't say there was like a miscommunication trope, but there's definitely some stuff that could have been fixed real quickly that I know was put in to make it more climactic and make the issue continue throughout the story. But it just, I don't know, like it just didn't hit right. I don't know if it was like a setting thing where like I just really liked her Western. She's better at writing Westerns, but I still want to try her out. It's just this one specifically was just kind of okay. Like there wasn't really anything outright bad about it. It's just, I think I personally went in with way too high of an expectation for this because of the other books that I read by her, and I expected them to be just as amazing, and I figured I'd love them even more because they're set in a time period and like a setting that I really enjoy reading about, and it just didn't work. So sadly this one only got 3.5 stars. However, I'm determined to read her backlogged books because I'm sure there's other things out there that are just hidden gems, and hers is relatively a smaller backlogged list, but I'm gonna read it because she is still, I would say, a really good author, and this is just one of the ones that kind of fell a little flat, and that's fine, that happens. Next book that I read was, again, for that vlog, and that is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This is the first in this series, and I loved it. It's going to be very similar in like how I felt about it to Our Violent Ends. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. I had 0 expectations going in. I thought this was just going to be another YA fantasy, which is fine, but it was going to feel like everything else. And while it does have that, there's definitely some aspects about our main couple, our main female lead, that is very cookie cutter, let's say, to other YA fantasy books. I still loved it. I loved the story of the Fates. I loved the world that this author has created. I've never read anything by Stephanie Garber before, but I've heard mixed things about her stuff. I feel like if you love her, you love her, or you hate her. Like there's not really an in-between, and I didn't really know what I was to expect going into it, but I was hoping I was going to like it because I had the second one already, and I done loved it. So this book follows our main character, Evangeline Fox, and the book really starts in this world. Basically, there's these things called fates that are basically like gods, but they're not. It's like they're gods, but they can die kind of thing. and different fates do different things. And so she goes to this guy named Jax, and he is the Prince of Hearts. So his ability is to help out broken-hearted people. And so her love of her life is about to marry her stepsister, and she is not okay with this. She's convinced that something has gone wrong here, and she is determined to stop this wedding. So she goes to the Prince of Hearts to help out. And the things happen, which causes more things to happen. And basically what ends up happening is she gets sent up north, which is where she's from, but her mother's from there, but she doesn't know a lot about it. There's a lot of mystery around the north. And the Empress of this world basically gets invited to this, the only way I can describe it is basically like a festival that's going to end in the prince marrying somebody or proposing to somebody. And the goal basically is the prince is going to meet a bunch of eligible people, and by the end of it, he's going to propose to somebody. And they're basically asking her to go and like as the place of their kingdom. And so she does. She takes her stepsister with her, and they go on this adventure. And Jax is there. And basically when she asks him to fix the wedding, at the beginning of the book, they create a deal where he'll stop the wedding if in the future, he's going to ask her to kiss 3 different people at the time that he chooses. And so they kind of team up to figure out, there's like a murder mystery plot almost a little bit near the end of this book that is fascinating. So I gave it 5 stars, like I said. It completely took me by surprise. Again, like, it's not the most original thing I've ever read, but the world is fascinating. I really enjoyed the characters. I think because I went in with such low expectations, I wasn't really sure what to expect or if I was going to expect anything, and it worked out great. So I loved it. I am super excited to get the second one. I'm really, really hoping to get the second one like quickly, because this end shooketh, if I could say so. And then the third one's going to come out later this year. It is a trilogy. So I think I read this at the perfect time, because again, the third one's coming out this year. So I have time to fit the second one in, and then I can get to the third one at the end of the year. And I am so very excited about it. So this one was the other 5-star. I think this is the last 5-star I read, which, considering I finished this one relatively early, is a little sad, but it happens. The next 2 books that I read were the second 2 volumes and the last 2 volumes of Stupid Love Comedy by, oh, I always never know how to pronounce this name. Sakurai is the author's last name. So this is basically presented as a love story, or like a possible romance. And we follow our main character, Suzu, who is a lazy author. She basically just is always late. Her stuff is always late and causing a lot of problems. And at the beginning of the very first volume, she gets a new editor, and the editor is not having it. He is making sure that she's going to do exactly what he tells her to do in the time period and make her understand that. But the relationship starts off with a very rocky start, because she overhears him on the phone complaining about her, and he catches her listening. So there's no false pretenses. He was going to pretend to be like nice to her at the beginning, but even though he couldn't stand her, but that plan backfires so fast, and so his goal is to make her great. And so I adored the first volume, and I read the second 2 back to back. And again, this was the last couple of books that was in that vlog that I did throughout the month of January, so I would highly recommend looking at my thoughts on this one near the end, because I feel like I did a better job explaining it. But basically, I gave both of them 3 stars, and I was very, very disappointed with how this book ended. It had such a promising beginning. The first volume was so much fun. It was ridiculous, but it was fun. And the second volume just went way, way downhill. It, like, it's presented as a romance, and the romance aspects is, like, not even, like, it's there, but it's barely important. It's like the author was trying to build it up like this was going to be a multiple volume, 5, 6, 7, that kind of volume series. And then in the third volume was like, right, romance, have to do something with that. And just started like putting situations in to kind of make you think that there's a romance happening. But at the same time, the ending was way, way rushed. Each volume has about like 5, 6 chapters in it to break it up. And the last volume had 2, 3, I think. 2 or 3, and then a bunch of random extra stories that either one of them made sense because it was kind of like an epilogue of sorts. It wasn't presented as the epilogue, but based on the timeline, it did kind of feel like an epilogue. And then a bunch of stories that follow people who were very, very, very side characters and introduced a random person at the last, like it was supposed to be this grand reveal, and I don't know who that person was. So it was like a whole mess. So I'm definitely going to be unhauling this. I gave it my all. Again, I think it had such a promising start, and then it just went downhill, which is funny because it's usually the opposite. I usually have a meh start, and then it starts to get better throughout the series. I think this would have either benefited from a multiple, like more than 3 volumes, so the author could really flesh out the romance in this, because it was almost non-existent, which is unfortunate because, again, it is presented as a romance. One thing that I will give this book credit for is that it shows the publishing industry and how a manga becomes the manga that is in like your physical hands. So there's definitely some chapters in here that, there's one that I have in the back of my mind specifically. It's called Deadline. It's in the 2nd volume, and it's the editor trying to show the author that her being on time is super important, because if she's not, she messes up all these other things. And so he takes her through the entire process of once she writes something all the way to getting it published, and shows how many people are working on it and how many people are waiting on her. And if she's late by this many days, this is what'll happen to the end result. And so does it help her change her ways? Not really, but it's a really interesting way for her to see how the process is. And there are little bits at the beginning of each volume from the actual editors of this volume not complaining, but talking about the author themselves, and really talks about how a lot of this, when it comes to like the publishing side of things, is actually accurate as far as like this person's life. So that part was interesting. I felt like the publishing industry was interesting. The problem was there's just so many characters that they randomly threw at you, and a lot of them weren't even remotely important or didn't become an issue. Like there was definitely a guy that was supposed to be an issue for their relationship, and he was like shown at the beginning, and then where did he go? I don't know. So there was a lot of flaws within the plot of this book, which is unfortunate because it's, again, such a promising start. But I am glad I read it, because now I know. And if I had waited longer between volumes, this would have probably gotten even less stars, honestly. So yeah, it didn't work too well, but it was fine. The next book was my middle grade that I read for this month, and that is the final book in the Greystone Secrets series by Margaret Patterson Haddix. This one is called The Messengers. This is a trilogy that follows the Greystone siblings. You have 3 of them, and the book really starts with them discovering on the news these 3 kids who go missing that look a little bit like them, actually a lot of it like them, not quite identical, but pretty close. But they have the same first and middle names and ages and birthdays, which spurs their mom, the Greystone's mom, into action. And she like all of a sudden has to go off on a work trip, and the kids start finding little like hints to what's going on. And there's a lot more to this world than that. This one is the last in the series, like I mentioned, and it gave me the same vibes as like the last book in the Aru Shah series. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars because it was just a lot of the same. These books are almost physically tiring by the time you get done, because there's just so much action in them. And while Margaret Patterson Haddix is really good at being able to like keep you invested and giving you all these really big twists and turns, because there is another series by this author that I have read most of, and it's very similar in that vein as well, of like there's a lot of action going on. This one felt like she was trying to pack so much into the course of 3 books, when maybe adding another book and spreading it out a little bit more might have been helpful, or adding just some more scenes where the kids could kind of like relax instead of going from one big thing to another big thing to another big thing, where you don't physically have time to breathe between these stories, because it's just, there's so much happening. And that would, I think, be my biggest critique. But the world is fascinating. This one was great at wrapping up exactly what it needed to do. This was a perfect finale for the series. It did kind of have that very big climactic moments that they needed to get to the end. I did feel like the end kind of wrapped up really quickly, like the quote-unquote villain of the story, I feel like gave up real fast all of a sudden. And give up's not the right word, but like, you know, kind of gave in to the pressure of like the good guys. And it just, there was just some stuff there. It does, I think, toy a little bit with being like morally gray in the sense of like, you're not fully good, you're not fully bad, but in a sense that maybe kids could go, like, I'm not sure if that's even something that like kids would pick up on at this age, because it wasn't like explicitly talked about. I just noticed that theme throughout with a specific character, especially throughout this book. So like maybe she was trying to layer that in a little bit, but I don't know, there's just aspects that I'm not sure kids might have picked up on because it was just so slight. But I still am glad that I read it. It had a very, very satisfying ending. I do think that these are good, maybe not to read back to back to back, because again, you're going to need some time to breathe between them, but reading them closer together I think is helpful because they do just like start right off from the last book, almost immediately. Like something will happen and the second book will start off like minutes later. So I think that these are good to read relatively closer together, even though they are kind of exhausting. So just kind of know that, but I still enjoyed it. There's still a lot of like sci-fi type themes in this book that I found really interesting. And the big twist, because this author is really good at having like that big twist within the first book, especially near the end of the first book, that really sets the rest of the series in motion. And how she comes up with these big twists is beyond me. They're always fascinating, and I still think very, very highly of the first book of the series because of that big twist. But overall, it just kind of felt okay. Again, I think this is where the like harder rating that I've been doing comes into play, because I definitely was a little stricter with my thoughts on this one. But again, 3.5 stars is still a good rating, and I still enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I can now tick this series off of my list of things that I read. The next one is so random. It's a random ebook that, like a Kindle Unlimited book that I found because of Instagram. Okay, it's called IOU by Christy Marie. This is the first in a series called 21 Rumors. I don't think I'm going to continue with this series. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. It was one of those things where like I was just scrolling, and you know how some people are like trying to get you to read certain books by putting like the plot and like this big thing to kind of hook you. Well, I'm usually good at not listening to those, and this one got me. So I downloaded it and randomly, super randomly decided to read it. I don't know why this is what I decided to do, but I decided to pick it up this month. This book takes place in college. So this is one of the other new adult books, which I didn't know. It doesn't really explain that on the back, and it took me a while to kind of process that, because I definitely thought that these were like adults. I thought this was an adult book with people who were full-on adults, but they are in their like their third and last years of college. So this follows our main character, Ainsley, and then our love interest in this book is called Maverick. And Ainsley, the book starts with her walking into her apartment from work, seeing her boyfriend sleeping with her roommate, and she freaks out and throws a candle at them and sets the curtains on fire. And so her roommate plays the victim, and, you know, the fire department comes, and she basically gets kicked out of the apartment building. Her landlord tells her she can't come back. And so she's trying to find a place to stay, and she just can't find a place to stay. And so she knows of this guy named Maverick, who is this very like mysterious guy who will help you out for an IOU. So literally you ask him for a favor, he gives you a card that he's literally like a playing card that he's written IOU on it. You put your number in his phone, and at some point in the future he's going to ask you for a favor, and you have to say yes no matter what. So it's like a favor for a favor kind of situation. And that's like, he's a very mysterious person. And so she comes to him asking to help her find a place to stay for an IOU. And so she ends up staying with him for like a hot second while he's trying to help her find a place. But he's got that very like mysterious macho guy vibe, and he doesn't want her to like see the like underbelly of him. He has to put on this like, you know, facade almost. And of course she like gets under his skin, and it's their relationship. Honestly, there's not really a whole lot to say about this. The smut scenes were fine. That's what I feel like I went in expecting, some of these scenes, and they were okay. Nothing spectacular. It just kind of felt like your run-of-the-mill random romance. I, again, don't know why I randomly picked this up. This is the second book that I picked up because of like an Instagram reel. So there's definitely another book out there that's done the same thing that I will definitely read at some point. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with trying things, because what if this book had been amazing and then I would have found a new favorite author, you know? So I'm not upset that that's how I found this. It's just one of those that, like, I'm glad I read this. Again, it still got 3.5 stars from me, but it wasn't the most amazing thing I've ever read. It was just a good palate cleanser, let's say. Like, it did dive into some more tougher subjects. We definitely talk about, like, mental health a little bit with our main male character. He definitely has some stuff going on. He has some medical conditions that play a big part in his life, and just kind of like the severity of that, and stress and like that kind of thing. So there is some backstory that I feel like is important, and you don't particularly expect in a romance like this, where you go in not really sure what to expect, and then you come out with a decent romance and some pretty decent character development. Like, as far as this story goes, the character development was pretty on point, which is fascinating to me. So I'm still glad that I read it. I'm not going to continue, because I looked at who the rest of the series follows, and I don't really hear about any of those, especially because the second one, I think it's the second one, maybe it's the third one, follows Maverick's brother, and he plays baseball. And so it's a very, like, sports romance, which, if that's your thing, great. It's not my thing, so I don't really have any interest in that. But it was fun. Like, this idea of, like, their banter is fascinating, because she keeps doing things throughout this book, and he keeps giving her IOUs for things, and it's just their little, like, way of flirting, and it's really cute. So there's definitely aspects that I really enjoyed, and I'm glad I read it. But, you know, again, not the most amazing thing I've ever read. The next one, however, was fantastic, and that was 3 Nights with a Scoundrel by Tessa Dare. This is the last book in the Stud Club trilogy, and I gave this 4 stars, which is so, so nice, because this is the second trilogy that Tessa Dare wrote, as far as, like, her writing order. And the first one she wrote, like, it had some moments, like, there was definitely some books in that series that were okay, but it just kind of was generally a flat series. And the first book in this series was kind of flat. The second one was better, and this one was right up there. Like, this is almost the Tessa Dare that we know today. Like, it doesn't have the humor in it, like, that I'm used to with Tessa Dare books, but the romance was fantastic, and there's some deaf representation within this book. Our main female character, Lily, is deaf due to an illness and has to learn how to read people's lips. And she had this illness when she was younger, so, like, at this point she's good and knows how everything works. But seeing that and seeing how people around her react to that is just fascinating. This series follows 3 guys who are part of the Stud Club, which is basically this club that is owns this horse, and they each have a token, and that like, there was a lot of people. There was 10 people in this club that owned this horse, and at this point there's only 3. And the series kicks off with the guy who created the club, Leo, who's Lily's brother, getting murdered, and so they're trying to figure out what's going on. So you've got that murder mystery throughout the 3 books, and Julian and Leo were best friends. And so Julian is like a rake, he sleeps around, you know, that kind of stuff. There's some secrets in his past that we learn about in this book, and he's convinced that with Leo gone, Lily needs to be taken care of, and therefore she needs to get married. And Lily's like, dude, I'm fine, chill. And so it's their friends to lover kind of relationship. Again, deaf representation was fantastic. It gave me the vibes of Never Seduce Scott, which also has that deaf representation. But what I liked about this is, while when you see things like this in historical romances, I feel like it's very easy to paint the main character who has whatever disability in a light where they are just so perfect. Like, she can read everybody's lips all the time. As long as they're looking at her, or as long as she's looking at them, she can find a way. She's found a way for people to, like, notice her, like, in the sense of, like, she's found workarounds through her life. So every room in their house has a mirror attached to right next to the door, and so if anyone comes in, they kind of like move the mirror and the light, and it kind of reflects and it shows her that someone's now entered the room and needs her attention. So she has found workarounds, but at the same time she talks about she has never learned how to sign, because that was not a thing that she knew about. Whereas Julian's mother was deaf, and so he knows how to sign. And you kind of see her learn to sign a little bit throughout this book. And then at the same time, you see her looking at people's lips, and if they don't pronounce it with a lot of inflection within their lips, sometimes words get mixed up, and she misses the wrong name. And so it showcases those aspects of the story that really show that she's not perfect at what she does, which I feel like is a very obvious thing that, like, when you think about it, of course, it's not going to be easy for her, but I feel like in past historical romances, it's been kind of glazed over as like, oh, she's had to learn this, so she's perfect at it. Whereas in this case, it shows that she is not. And I really liked that part. I also just really liked Lily and Julian's relationship. There's definitely some stuff in here that I'm like, oh my gosh, if you just talked about your problems, everything would be fine. And like everything would be solved with a conversation. Or like some of the stuff that happens that's like near the climactic moments, near the end. It's like, you know, stop being stubborn and talk about things with the person that you love, and then everything will be fine. So there's definitely some like tropes and stuff in here that like drove me a little nuts, but overall, this had all the swinging moments that I wanted. I loved their relationship. It was genuinely caring from day one, and it wasn't like they were discovering that they loved each other. It was like they knew they loved each other. It was just trying to figure out how to do that when certain people are very stubborn about things in their life. So this got us right back to where we are with Tessa Dare, and at this point we have two books left, and then we're going to finish everything by Tessa Dare, and what a freaking accomplishment. I feel honestly awesome, not gonna lie. The very last book, as the sun just slowly takes over everything, was the third volume of Spy Family by Tatsuya Endo. This one was quite good. I gave this one 4 stars. This series basically is very found family-esque. You have our 3 main characters. We've got Twilight, Yor, and Anya, and Twilight is a spy, and his mission is basically to infiltrate this kids' boarding school, kind of, because they need him to get tight with this guy and his kids go there. And so in order to do so, he has to create this family. So he runs into this woman named Yor, who is an assassin. Now, he doesn't know she's an assassin. That's kind of like her side job that she doesn't tell anybody about. But he runs into her, and they strike up a bargain of like she needs to get married for, I can't remember what it is, but there's certain reasons why she asks to get married. And so like they do that, and then he goes and adopts this girl named Anya from an orphanage. Little does he know that she's a telepath and she can read minds. So you've got all 3 of these people. And also he doesn't tell Yor or Anya that he's a spy. They just, like, they each have secrets, but they're creating this fake family for different reasons for each of them. And so this book is a slower volume than the last couple. It really focuses on Twilight and Yor's relationship, not necessarily in like a romantic way, although I think they are starting to like leave kernels of that. I'm not sure where the series is going to go, but like in my mind, I think they're starting to leave little things like it could possibly show them being a real family. And it's really just like some of the stuff that happens at the end of the second book and the beginning of this book really puts into light that they don't really know a lot about each other, and like if they are to make this fake marriage successful, they're gonna have to start doing things. And so in this one, they like go out on a date to really get to know each other a little bit more, and that kind of helps build that chemistry. So you got that aspect. You also have Anya, who is really the main key to Twilight's plan, as far as like she needs to get tight with this other guy's kids that he needs her to be cool with them. And so he doesn't ever tell her that, but like she can obviously read his mind and figure out what, you know, he needs from her. And so in this one, you see her kind of taking a backseat a little bit to their story, but at the same time, you do see her kind of stepping into her own and really doing some things that's going to be beneficial, because like because she can read his minds, clearly can tell that Twilight is a spy and Yor is an assassin. So like she knows these things, and neither of them obviously are talking about it. So she can see behind the scenes, and is really starting to kind of help her family out from behind the scenes a little bit. So that was really fun. I really enjoyed it. It, again, 4 stars, a slower volume, like I said, than the other 2 as far as like it being action-packed and things happening, but I definitely enjoyed it. I'm excited to see what the next volume is, because we definitely had like, I wouldn't say twists or reveals, but there's definitely some stuff that was cliffhanger-esque at the end of this one. And I'm like, ooh, I want to see where that's going to go. So I love the series. I think it's so fun. I love seeing these 3 people who are totally random and should not work together. That's really fun for me. So I ended the month with a very fun read. So that is a look at all of the books that I read in January. We've been here for so long. My voice is starting to go, if you couldn't tell already, but I thank you so much for sticking around. Please let me know, as always, if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in today's video, or what you started out the year with. I would love to know. If you could pick one thing, tell me what your very first read of the year was. I find that fascinating. I feel like sometimes books that you read first kind of set the tone for the year. Not always, but sometimes I like to see just what you guys read. So please let me know that. And if you want to comment something but you're not sure what to comment, try to figure out what's a good emoji. Comment the open book because it's a new year, so we're starting off on a blank slate. Why not? But if you liked this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there as well as other fun bookish links, so check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!